My former daughter-in-law slept with my husband a week before we were set to finalize our divorce. I didn't scream. I didn't confront anyone. I simply smiled and started planning. The day it all began, the late afternoon sun bled through the gauzy curtains in my kitchen, spilling golden light over the polished table where I was setting out porcelain plates. I'd been told there would be a visitor. A quiet lunch, she'd said, but the request came from an unexpected voice. Leah, the older sister of my son's wife, Isabel. Leah and I had never been close. We spoke politely at family gatherings, shared occasional small talk, but never anything personal. That morning when her voice trembled over the phone and she asked if we could speak, just us, something inside me tightened. So I agreed. I smoothed the tablecloth, cream-colored linen I'd used for decades of anniversaries and birthdays. At 62, I still took pride in keeping tradition alive, even if my house in East Haven had grown unbearably quiet in recent years. Thomas, my husband of 40 years, had been spending more nights working late. Our son Daniel was wrapped up in his life with Isabel, leaving me with polite phone calls instead of visits. I had learned to fill the silence with baking, gardening, and long walks that ended with no one waiting at the door. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to find Leah standing there, clutching her handbag as if it could shield her from what she was about to say. Her lipstick was smudged, her eyes rimmed red. "Thank you for seeing me," she murmured. Of course I let her in. I poured tea, offered cucumber sandwiches, and pretended not to notice the tremor in her hands. "What's wrong?" finally asked. She looked up, and in her gaze I saw something that froze the air between us. Guilt, sorrow, and fear. Leah's fingers tightened around her teacup as though the warmth might steady her. She didn't touch the sandwiches. She didn't look at the cake I'd made. Instead, she stared at her lap, breathing shallowly. "It's about Isabel," she whispered, voice breaking. "And Thomas." For a moment, the words didn't land. They hung in the air between us, like a cloud that hadn't decided whether to rain. When they finally settled, something deep inside me shifted. I felt it, like the slow crack of ice underfoot. "What about them?" I asked, my tone as even as I could make it. Her eyes met mine, brimming with tears. "They've been seeing each other. For weeks. I caught them at that little bistro on Ashford Street, holding hands, laughing like teenagers. When they thought no one was watching, they kissed." I felt my spine stiffen, but my hands stayed folded neatly in my lap. "Are you certain?" Leah nodded, shame coloring her cheeks. "I confronted Isabel. She didn't even try to deny it. She laughed. Said you were old. Said Thomas deserved someone more exciting. She said when the divorce is final, she'll make sure you get next to nothing." There was no sharp pang of heartbreak. No sob threatening to choke me. What I felt instead was a cold, calculating quiet, like frost spreading across glass. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, leaning forward. Leah reached for my hand. "Because it's wrong. Because you've been nothing but kind to this family. And Daniel, he doesn't deserve to be married to someone like her." I looked at her young, unlined hand resting on my weathered one. And that was the moment I decided I would not fight this battle the way they expected. I would let them believe they'd already won. After Leah left, I sat at the dining table for a long time, staring at the untouched sandwiches and the lemon cake that had lost its inviting sheen. The house felt different, still but not in the familiar way. It was the stillness of a room where something venomous had slipped in unseen. When Thomas came home that evening, I was in the kitchen preparing his favorite, roast chicken with rosemary potatoes. The scent filled the air and I wore the same calm expression I'd worn for years. "Smells amazing," he said, loosening his tie without looking at me. "Long day?" I asked pleasantly, as if I didn't know his lunch break had been spent with my son's wife. "The usual," he replied before disappearing upstairs. We ate in near silence, talking only about the leaky gutter, the forecast for the weekend, the kind of conversations you could have with a stranger on a bus. But I watched him closely now, the way he checked his phone every few minutes, the faint trace of an unfamiliar cologne, the way he no longer met my eyes. That night, while he slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and weighed my options. I could confront him now, ignite a storm that would shatter everything in an instant. Or I could wait. 3 nights later, Isabel came over for our usual Sunday dinner. She arrived draped in a fitted silk dress, her perfume preceding her into the room. She embraced me warmly, her lips brushing my cheek with a performance-worthy smile. "You look wonderful, Clara," she said, settling onto a stool at the kitchen island. "I was hoping we could have a little chat, just us girls." I poured her wine without hesitation, keeping my face open and unguarded. "Of course," I said. "What's on your mind?" I already knew. Isabel swirled the wine in her glass, watching the dark liquid catch the kitchen light. When she finally spoke, her voice was coated in false concern. "I've noticed you and Thomas seem distant lately," she began, leaning forward like a confidant. "At family gatherings there's this tension." I tilted my head slightly. "Tension?" She reached across the counter, resting her manicured hand over mine. "Marriage is hard after so many years. Sometimes the spark just fades. And that's okay." I gave her a small, thoughtful smile as if she were imparting great wisdom. "You know," she continued, lowering her voice, "maybe counseling could help. Or maybe it's time to think about what would make you both truly happy in the long run." "You think we should divorce?" I asked, my tone neutral, careful. Her eyes flickered, surprised I'd said it aloud, but she recovered quickly. "I'm not saying that. I just think life is too short to be unfulfilled. You're still an attractive woman, Clara. I'm sure there are men who would adore you." Her words were delivered like gifts, but I could feel the poison under the wrapping. When Daniel arrived, she transformed. Gone was the worldly advisor. In her place, the doting wife, hand on his arm, laughing at his every word. But her gaze flicked to the doorway the moment Thomas's car pulled into the driveway. Thomas entered 20 minutes late, claiming work had held him up. The air between him and Isabel shifted almost imperceptibly, enough for me to see it, but subtle enough for Daniel to miss. Over dinner I said little. I sliced roast beef with steady hands while they exchanged glances, each convinced they were weaving an invisible web. They didn't realize I had already begun cutting the strands. The following Thursday, while Thomas was at work, I drove to a part of town he never ventured. The historic district, where narrow streets were lined with restored brick buildings and antique lampposts. On the third floor of a corner office with frosted glass doors, I met Camille Duarte, a divorce attorney known for dismantling high-profile cases with quiet precision. She was younger than I expected, mid-40s, sharp navy suit and eyes that missed nothing. After I explained my situation, she leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. "Why haven't you confronted him?" she asked. "Because I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with before I make my move," I said. "The house. The accounts. Our family's legacy. I won't make a single step until I know where I stand." Camille nodded slowly. "Smart. Let's start with assets." For the next hour, we combed through decades of documents. The house my grandparents built, the business Thomas inherited from his father, the investments we'd grown together. Then I handed her something that made her eyebrows lift. A copy of my family's trust, untouched for nearly 70 years. "Interesting," she murmured, scanning the text. "Your grandparents were meticulous. This trust has clauses I've never seen in a modern agreement. One in particular stands out: infidelity." I leaned forward. "What about it?" "If a marriage ends due to adultery, the innocent spouse retains full rights to all trust properties. The guilty party forfeits any claim entirely." The words settled over me like a revelation. "So if I prove Thomas's affair, you keep the house, the land, and several other properties he probably thinks are his to take." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something dangerous. Hope? They thought they were playing chess. They didn't even know all the pieces on the board. That evening, I served Thomas a simple dinner: grilled salmon, lemon rice, and a salad he barely touched. He seemed distracted, checking his phone between bites, his thumb moving quickly across the screen. I knew exactly who he was texting. When we were clearing the dishes, I spoke casually. "I've been thinking about what Isabel said the other day, about our marriage." He froze just for a second before turning to me with feigned concern. "What about it?" "Maybe she's right," I said lightly, rinsing plates. "Maybe we should consider our options." He tried to keep his face solemn, but I caught it. The faint lift of his mouth, the flicker of relief in his eyes. "Are you saying you want a divorce?" "I'm saying," I replied, drying my hands, "that perhaps it's time we both pursue our own happiness." He nodded slowly, as though considering something monumental, though I suspected he'd been waiting for this moment for months. If that's what you want, Clara. I want you to be happy. Liar. I smiled faintly and said, then maybe it's for the best. He believed me. That night, as he slept beside me, breathing deep with satisfaction, I stared at the ceiling and imagined Isabel's face when she realized the game she thought she was winning was a trap I had set myself. The next week, Thomas arranged a meeting with his lawyer, a man named Victor Sloan. He was exactly what I expected. Silver-haired, expensively dressed, the sort of man who thought his voice could decide outcomes before papers were signed. I agreed to attend without hesitation. Thomas seemed almost giddy, mistaking my calm for defeat. It was time to let them think they'd gotten everything they wanted, and then take it all away. Victor Sloan's office was a monument to intimidation. Dark mahogany shelves, a desk large enough to seat a small family, and a panoramic view of the city below. Thomas stood near the window, pretending to read messages on his phone. Isabel was there too, seated beside my son Daniel, her hand resting possessively on his knee as she murmured something in his ear. Daniel looked pale, anxious. He still believed this was an amicable split, two adults parting ways after decades together. He didn't know the truth yet. Mrs. Ellery, Mr. Ellery, Sloan began smoothly, gesturing for us to sit. I've prepared a settlement proposal I believe is fair to both parties. He slid a thick folder across the desk to me. I opened it slowly, scanning the pages. According to Sloan's carefully chosen language, I would walk away with a small condo in the older part of town, half our joint savings and a modest monthly allowance. Thomas, meanwhile, would keep the family home, the business, the vacation properties, and the lion's share of our investments. This seems one-sided, I said mildly, keeping my eyes on the paper. Sloan gave a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. Your husband has been the primary provider. The house, frankly, is a costly burden to maintain. I think you'll find the condo much more manageable. Manageable. As if I were a fragile relic in need of a simpler life. Isabel shifted in her seat, a glint of triumph in her eyes. I imagined her already redecorating my bedroom, replacing my roses with something soulless. I closed the folder gently. You've thought of everything, I said. Sloan nodded. We've tried. Good, I replied, picking up the pen. Where do I sign? The silence in the room was delicious. The click of the pen on paper echoed louder in that room than it had any right to. I signed each page neatly, my signature as steady as it had been the day I signed our marriage certificate 40 years ago. When I finished, I placed the pen down with deliberate care and looked straight at Thomas. I hope this gives you exactly what you've been looking for. Something flickered in his eyes. Was it guilt? Maybe. But it was gone almost as soon as it appeared, replaced by that smug, practiced calm of a man convinced he'd gotten away with it. Isabel squeezed Daniel's hand with her free one, smiling sweetly. I'm so proud of you both, she said, her voice syrupy with false warmth. It takes real strength to put family first. Family first. From a woman who had been destroying mine for months. We walked out of Sloan's office together, but as soon as we reached the sidewalk, Daniel pulled me into a hug. Mom, are you sure about this? You seem so calm in there. I patted his cheek gently. I'm fine, sweetheart. Everything will work out exactly as it should. As they walked toward their car, Isabel looped her arm through Daniel's and began talking excitedly about helping me settle into the condo, even suggesting a retirement community where I could make friends my own age. I watched them go, the afternoon wind tugging at my coat. I felt no rush of anger, no sting of humiliation, only the steady, cooling satisfaction of a plan quietly taking shape. They thought they'd just won. They thought they'd stripped me of everything that mattered. In 60 days they would learn that some games have rules they never even knew existed. 2 weeks after the papers were signed, I was pruning the hydrangeas in my front garden when Daniel's car rolled into the driveway. He didn't wave. He didn't even get out right away. He just sat there, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him upright. When he finally stepped out, I barely recognized him. My neat, polished son looked rumpled, shirt wrinkled, hair uncombed, eyes hollowed by something more than exhaustion. Daniel, I called, setting down my shears. What's wrong? He stopped halfway up the path, his mouth opening and closing without sound. And then, like a rope snapping, he broke. His knees buckled and he sank onto the front steps. She's been lying to me, he whispered, his voice raw. All this time, she's been lying. I lowered myself beside him, hands folded in my lap, waiting. I found them, Mom. Messages. Hundreds of them between Isabel and Dad. They've been planning this for months, waiting until after you signed everything. She bragged to someone about how easy it was to manipulate us both. His words didn't surprise me, but hearing them spoken aloud made the betrayal feel sharper, heavier. How did you find out? I asked quietly. Leah called. She said she couldn't keep quiet anymore. She told me exactly where to look. I checked Isabel's phone while she was in the shower. She didn't even bother to hide it. Daniel's laugh was bitter, almost unrecognizable. She said I was naive. That Dad could give her things I never could. I rested my hand on his shoulder. You didn't deserve this. He turned to me, eyes wet. How are you so calm? As I thought, calm is the sharpest weapon I have. Daniel searched my face like he was trying to find a crack in the calm I wore. Dad betrayed you too. 40 years, Mom. How are you just sitting here? I took a breath, the garden air scented with cut flowers and damp earth. Because I've known Daniel. I've known for weeks. His brow furrowed. You knew? All this time. I nodded. And while they thought they were pulling the strings, I was collecting mine. Over the next hour, I told him everything. Leah's visit, the quiet weeks of pretending, my meeting with Camille Duarte, and the clauses in the family trust that Thomas and Isabel knew nothing about. I described how I'd signed those papers without hesitation because the house, the land, and the legacy tied to it were never theirs to take. Daniel sat frozen, absorbing each detail. So you let them think they won? Sometimes, I said, the best way to end a fight is to let your opponent walk straight into the wall they built for you. He let out a short, stunned laugh. I can't believe you did this. I couldn't let them see me coming, I replied. And I couldn't let you get caught in the crossfire until I had everything in place. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, then said, So, what happens now? I stood, brushing soil from my hands. Now we let them try to take what they think they've earned. And then we watch it slip through their fingers. In the distance, a car slowed on the street. Leah stepped out, spotting Daniel, her face taut with worry. When she saw us together, something eased in her expression. She had no idea she was walking into the second act of my plan. Leah crossed the yard quickly, her coat flaring in the wind. Daniel, I'm so sorry, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I never wanted you to find out like this. You saved me, Daniel replied firmly. If you hadn't told me where to look, I'd still be living in her fantasy. Leah's eyes glistened. I should have spoken up sooner. I should have. I cut her off gently. You did exactly what needed to be done. You chose truth over comfort, and that takes courage. Leah glanced at me in surprise. I was afraid you'd hate me for telling him. My dear, you didn't bring this ugliness into our family. You exposed it. And now we can deal with it in the light. Daniel's gaze moved between us, something unspoken passing in his eyes. Stay for dinner, he said suddenly. Mom makes the best roast in the county, and I think we could all use some normal conversation. Leah hesitated, looking to me. I nodded. It's been far too long since we had honesty at this table. Inside, the air felt different. Lighter somehow, as if Isabel's absence had lifted a pressure none of us realized we'd been carrying. I set the table while Daniel and Leah chopped vegetables, their voices low but easy. Over dinner, conversation drifted to small things. Old memories, shared meals, even the time Isabel burned an entire pan of rolls and blamed the oven. For the first time in months, I heard genuine laughter in my house. As I watched Daniel and Leah exchanging warm, unguarded smiles, I realized something unexpected. This betrayal hadn't just exposed who Thomas and Isabel really were. It was beginning to show us who we could be without them. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of rain against the bedroom windows. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table watching droplets race each other down the glass. It was the kind of quiet that invites thinking and planning. Halfway through my second cup, Daniel's car pulled up again. He came in without knocking, a folded envelope in his hand and a look on his face that told me he'd uncovered something new. This came in the mail, he said, sliding it across the table. I opened it to find a bank statement addressed to Isabel. At first glance, nothing unusual until I noticed the account number. It wasn't one I recognized, and the deposits into it were substantial. She's been moving money, Daniel explained. Transfers from Dad's business account into her own, masked as consulting fees. It was sloppy work for someone who thought herself clever. I took the statement in hand, the paper crisp under my fingers. Have you told your father? Daniel shook his head. I wanted you to see it first. Before I could reply, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed a name I didn't expect. Camille Duarte. Clara, you might want to sit down, she said when I answered. A colleague of mine forwarded me a copy of an insurance policy filed 6 months ago in your name. The beneficiary is Isabel. And the signature on it isn't yours. A chill slid down my spine. You're telling me she forged it? That's exactly what I'm telling you. And that's not just fraud, it's a felony. When I hung up, Daniel was staring at me. What did she say? I set the envelope down, meeting his eyes. She's been playing a dangerous game, Daniel. And I think she just made her last move. By evening, the rain had stopped, but the air outside felt charged, like the calm before a lightning strike. Daniel and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the forged insurance policy and bank statement spread between us. This isn't just betrayal anymore, I said quietly. This is criminal. Daniel's jaw tightened. So what do we do? I reached for my phone. We give this to people who know exactly how to deal with it. An hour later, Detective Adrian Morales from the East Haven Police Department stood in my living room. Tall, composed, and carrying an air of methodical patience, he examined each document carefully, his pen scratching against a small leather notebook. The insurance forgery is enough to open a case, he said, glancing up. The money transfers. Those could indicate embezzlement or misappropriation of business funds, depending on whose name is on the accounts. And you're sure this signature isn't yours? Positive, I replied. He nodded. We'll send it to handwriting analysis, but I can already tell it's been traced. That's a rookie mistake. Daniel crossed his arms. So what's the next step? I'll need a formal statement from both of you, Morales said, and permission to pull records from the bank and the insurance company. If there's more, we'll find it. As he packed up the documents, I caught the faintest flicker of something in his eyes. Respect. You've been patient, Mrs. Ellery, he said as he left. That patience might be what brings her down. After he was gone, Daniel leaned back in his chair. Do you think Dad knows about the forgery? I looked toward the darkened window where my reflection stared back at me. If he doesn't now, he will soon. And when he does, it won't be Isabel's triumph he's looking at. It'll be her undoing. 2 days later, Leah showed up unannounced, her face pale against the crisp winter air. She clutched a folder to her chest like it might burn her if she let go. We need to talk, she said the moment I opened the door. Inside, she sat at the edge of the couch, her posture tense. There's something I should have told you weeks ago, but I was afraid it would sound too far-fetched. Daniel leaned forward. After everything we've seen, try us. Leah hesitated, then opened the folder. 2 years ago, our Aunt Marjorie died. Sudden heart attack. Isabel was taking care of her at the time, helping with medications, errands, that kind of thing. Everyone assumed it was natural. Marjorie had a heart condition. That's not unusual, Daniel said cautiously. Leah's voice lowered. But afterward, Isabel inherited her house and most of her savings. And she wasn't grieving. She was almost smug about it. I brushed it off at the time. But now, she glanced at the documents on my coffee table, the forged policy, the secret bank account. Now I'm wondering if it was really a coincidence. A heavy silence filled the room. Have you told the police? I asked. Leah nodded. Detective Morales already has the information. He said if there's enough to warrant suspicion, they can have Marjorie's body exhumed for testing. Daniel's expression hardened. If she hurt Aunt Marjorie, she won't just lose everything. She'll lose her freedom for the rest of her life. I studied Leah, seeing the weight she'd been carrying. You've done the right thing, I told her softly. It's not easy to speak against family, even when it's necessary. Leah shook her head. Family doesn't lie, steal, or worse. Whatever Isabel is, she's not family anymore. She didn't know it yet, but the past she'd just uncovered was about to set fire to Isabel's carefully constructed future. It was just afternoon when I heard the low rumble of engines on the gravel drive. I glanced out the front window and saw 2 vehicles. Thomas's black sedan followed by a small moving truck. Daniel and Leah joined me at the window. She's here, Daniel muttered. The truck came to a stop and Isabel stepped out of the passenger seat, her heels clicking against the stones. Her hair was immaculate, but her expression, twisted with barely contained fury, was the first crack I'd seen in her perfect mask. Thomas climbed out slower, shoulders slumped, his eyes avoiding the house altogether. Two movers stood awkwardly by the truck, clearly unsure if they should start unloading. Daniel moved toward the door, his voice calm but sharp. "I'll handle this." I stayed back in the living room, watching from the window as he stepped onto the porch. "You're not welcome here, Isabel. Neither of you are. This is my house now," she shot back, her voice rising. "We signed papers. It's ours." Leah stepped forward then, her voice steady. "It never was yours. It never will be." Isabel turned on her sister, eyes blazing. "You did this. You poisoned them against me because you're jealous I got out of our pathetic family and you're still stuck being nobody." Leah didn't flinch. "I'd rather be nobody than be you." Isabel lunged, but Daniel was there, stepping between them. "Get off this property," he said, his tone like iron. "Both of you. You have 5 minutes before I call the police." Thomas finally spoke, his voice defeated. "Come on, Isabel. It's over." But she wasn't done. She looked past them right into the window where I stood. Her mouth twisted into a sneer. "You think you've won, Clara? You don't know what I'm capable of." She was about to find out what I was capable of. I unlatched the window and pushed it open, letting the cold air slice through the tension on the lawn. My voice carried easily. "The only secrets being exposed today are yours, Isabel. Detective Morales is very interested in your relationship with Aunt Marjorie." The effect was immediate. Color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. Thomas's head snapped toward her, confusion flashing in his eyes. "What is she talking about?" he demanded. "Nothing," Isabel snapped, but her voice had lost its edge. Thomas didn't press. He just grabbed her arm, urgency replacing his earlier sluggishness. "We're leaving." She jerked away from him, glaring up at the open window. "This isn't over, Clara. I will make you regret." "Regret what?" I interrupted, my tone icy. "Keeping my home? Protecting my family? Or making sure you answer for everything you've done?" Her mouth opened, but no words came. Thomas pulled her toward the sedan, motioning for the movers to stand down. The truck's engine rumbled back to life, gravel spitting under the tires as both vehicles retreated down the drive. Inside, Daniel closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling a long breath. "That was something." Leah crossed her arms, her eyes still on the window. She looked terrified. "Good," I said simply. "Fear is the first step toward truth." For the first time since this started, I felt the weight shift. No longer was I simply responding to their schemes. I was dismantling them piece by piece. And Isabel had just learned that I wasn't the naive woman she thought she could steamroll. The real dismantling was yet to come. We gathered in the kitchen, the scent of coffee mingling with the faint metallic tang of adrenaline. Daniel set 3 mugs on the table while Leah retrieved the folder of evidence we'd been building. Bank statements, the forged insurance policy, handwritten notes in Isabel's curling script. Daniel spread the documents out like a battlefield map. "Morales already has copies of everything, but we should organize them for the district attorney. If this goes to trial, I want it airtight." Leah nodded, her voice low but firm. "The more we have, the less she can wriggle out of it. She's slippery, but she's also sloppy." I took a sip of coffee, my gaze resting on the neat stack of papers. "She's not just sloppy, she's arrogant. Arrogance makes people underestimate the ones they think are beneath them." Daniel gave me a small, knowing smile. "She underestimated you. And Thomas," I added, "for all his posturing, doesn't have the spine for a drawn-out fight. Once he sees the legal weight coming down, he'll fold. Isabel, though, she'll cling until the last thread snaps." Leah leaned forward. "Morales said the DA is especially interested in the insurance fraud. It's provable, it's clean, and it ties directly to her. Add in the suspicious circumstances around Aunt Marjorie and she's facing more than just financial ruin," I finished. Daniel sat back, running a hand through his hair. "When this is over, I want her out of my memory as much as she's out of my life." "She will be," I said quietly. "But first she has to face everything she's tried to bury." We spent the rest of the afternoon compiling timelines, cross-referencing dates, and writing statements. Each detail was another knot in the net tightening around Isabel. And when it finally closed, there would be no way out. 2 mornings later, Detective Morales called. His voice carried the steady weight of someone who knew the next words would change everything. "I have an update," he said. "You're going to want to sit down." I was already at the kitchen table, sorting through old photographs for no reason other than to keep my hands busy. "Go ahead." The district attorney has filed formal charges against Isabel Ellery: insurance fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The bank records you provided sealed it. She can't explain the forged policy away, not with the handwriting analysis and the witness statements we've collected. I closed my eyes briefly. "And Aunt Marjorie?" There was a pause before he answered. "The exhumation is complete. The toxicology report shows lethal levels of digitalis in her system. It wasn't an accidental overdose. Given Isabel's access to the medication and the timing of Marjorie's death, we have enough to move forward with a first-degree murder investigation." A shiver ran through me, cold and clean. "So she really did it?" "Yes," Morales confirmed. "And there's more. We've also found evidence she researched the effects of digitalis online weeks before your aunt's death, using a device registered to her name." I didn't realize I was gripping the phone so tightly until my fingers ached. "What about Thomas?" "No direct evidence tying him to the murder. But as for the fraud, he's been charged as an accessory. He's already trying to negotiate a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation." After we hung up, I stayed seated, staring out the window at the bare branches swaying in the wind. Justice was coming for Isabel. Slowly, methodically, and with a force she'd never prepared for. The storm she had built herself was finally breaking, right over her head. It was just after dusk when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel again. This time, the sound carried a frantic edge, the way a storm wind rushes through trees. I peered through the window and saw Thomas's sedan screech to a stop. Isabel climbed out before it had fully settled, her coat hanging open, her hair in wild disarray. She didn't look polished or untouchable anymore. She looked cornered. Thomas followed more slowly, his expression a strange blend of defeat and pleading. I didn't go to the door. Instead, I stayed in the hallway, close enough to hear but far enough that they couldn't see my face. Daniel opened the door for them, blocking the entrance with his frame. "You're not coming in," he said flatly. Isabel's voice was high and brittle. "We need to talk. Claire, please. They're lying about me." "The police." "You mean Detective Morales?" Daniel cut in. "The one who has your forged signature, your bank records, and your internet search history?" Thomas stepped forward. "Clara, whatever you think." I moved into the doorway, then meeting his eyes. "I don't think, Thomas. I know." Isabel's composure cracked completely. "You've ruined my life," she spat. "Everything I worked for, gone." "You mean everything you tried to steal?" I corrected calmly. "Yes, that's gone." For a moment she just stared at me, breathing hard, her eyes darting as though searching for some escape. Then with a sudden burst of venom she hissed, "This isn't over." Daniel didn't flinch. "Oh, it's over. You just don't realize yet how far you've fallen." Thomas finally put a hand on her arm, but there was no authority in the gesture, only resignation. They turned and walked back to the car, shadows stretching long behind them in the porch light. It was the walk of people who knew the ground was crumbling under their feet. When the sound of their car faded into the night, the house seemed to exhale. Daniel shut the door firmly, leaning against it for a moment like he was physically keeping the past out. Leah emerged from the kitchen with 3 mugs of tea. "You didn't let them inside." "Good." Daniel handed me one of the mugs, his eyes searching mine. "It feels different now. Like the worst part is over." I took a sip, letting the warmth settle into me. "The worst part is knowing you're under attack and pretending you're not. Now we don't have to pretend anymore." We moved to the living room, the 3 of us sitting close, the documents and evidence stacked neatly on the coffee table. A reminder of everything we'd endured. Leah curled her legs under her, her voice softer than I'd heard it in weeks. "You know, Isabel always told me nice people finish last. That's why she thought she could get away with everything. She assumed no one would fight back if she smiled while twisting the knife." Daniel gave her a faint smile. She was wrong. I glanced between them. There was something unspoken in the way they looked at each other now. A bond forged not by romance but by surviving the same storm. It was steady, solid. I set my mug down. "When this is done, when she's convicted, when Thomas is gone, you'll both have a choice. You can let this define you or you can let it sharpen you." Daniel nodded slowly. And you? What will you do? I smiled faintly. I've already decided. I'll rebuild. And I'll do it without any of the rot that's been clinging to this family for years. Outside, the night was still. Inside, for the first time in months, I felt the balance tilt in our favor. 3 days later, the knock on my door was firm, deliberate. When I opened it, Detective Morales stood there, coat collar turned up against the wind, a manila folder tucked under his arm. "May I come in?" he asked. Daniel and Leah joined us at the table as Morales spread the contents of the folder out. Typed reports, photographs, and a printed court schedule. "The district attorney has secured an indictment," he said. "Isabel Ellery is officially charged with first-degree murder, insurance fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The trial is set to begin in 6 weeks." Leah's breath caught. "So it's real now. She's actually going to face this." Morales nodded. "The evidence is solid. The toxicology, the forged documents, the money trail. It's all there. As for Thomas, his cooperation has earned him a plea deal. Accessory to fraud, probation, and a fine. He won't serve prison time, but his reputation, that's gone." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's more than he deserves, but at least he won't be standing beside her in court." I kept my hands folded, absorbing the weight of it. 6 weeks. After months of enduring her smugness, her taunts, her whispered poison, Isabel would finally stand in a place where every lie could be stripped away. Morales gathered his papers but left one photo on the table. A picture of the front of the courthouse, sunlit and imposing. "When you walk in here to testify," he said, meeting my gaze, "remember, you're not the one on trial." After he left, Leah traced her finger along the edge of the photo. 6 weeks, she murmured. "Yes," I said quietly. 6 weeks until the storm she created finally swallows her whole. And for the first time I could almost taste the victory. The morning after Morales's visit, I woke earlier than usual. The air in the house felt different, charged like the pause before the first clap of thunder. 6 weeks sounded like a long time, but I knew it would pass in the blink of an eye. I made coffee and spread my own folders across the dining table. Dates, emails, bank transfers. I read them again and again, not because I doubted their accuracy, but because I wanted the rhythm of the facts to be second nature. When I testified, I didn't want to tell a story. I wanted to deliver an unshakable truth. Daniel joined me an hour later, hair tousled, carrying his own stack of documents. Leah's at her apartment collecting the rest of the messages she screenshotted. She thinks there's more, stuff Isabel sent to friends bragging about how easy this was going to be. I gave him a small nod. The more the better. The jury should see her as she really is, gloating in her own handwriting. He sat down, scanning my papers. "Are you nervous?" "Yes," I admitted. "But not about facing her. I'm nervous about staying calm enough to make every word count. I don't want anger to blur the facts. That's what she'll want," me flustered. Daniel's jaw tightened. "She won't get that from you. You've been steady through all of this." Leah returned just before noon, her phone full of new evidence. Screenshots of Isabel mocking me to friends, calling me an antique with a fortune just waiting to be claimed. I saved every image to my own records. By the time the sun dipped low in the sky, our piles of paper had become an arsenal. We weren't just ready to defend ourselves anymore. We were ready to take her apart, piece by piece, in front of a judge and jury. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and cold marble, a scent that seemed to cling to every hallway. I walked in with Daniel and Leah at my side, my heels clicking steadily against the polished floor. I'd chosen my clothes carefully. Simple, dignified, the kind of presence that didn't need embellishment. Isabel was already seated at the defense table when we entered. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked smaller. Her perfectly styled hair hung limp, her makeup failing to mask the pale cast of her skin. Thomas sat in the gallery, not beside her. His eyes avoided mine entirely. The prosecution began with opening statements, laying out the charges with the precision of a scalpel. Each count, fraud, forgery, theft, and finally murder, was delivered without flourish, the facts landing heavy in the room. When it was my turn to take the stand, I walked up without hesitation. My oath rang clearly, the promise to tell the truth settling in my chest like a steady drumbeat. The prosecutor guided me through my testimony, How I learned of the affair, the financial irregularities, the forged policy. I kept my answers calm and deliberate, letting the documents and dates speak louder than emotion. When the defense cross-examined, Isabel's attorney tried to rattle me, implying I was a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge, suggesting I'd fabricated evidence. But every attempt slid off. My answers were measured, each one backed by proof already entered into the record. At one point, Isabel's eyes locked on mine, her expression a strange mix of fury and pleading. I didn't look away. By the time I stepped down from the stand, I could feel the shift in the room. Isabel's mask was cracking, not just for me but for everyone watching. And we were only on the first day. On the third day of the trial, Leah took the stand. She wore a plain navy dress and no jewelry, her dark hair pulled back. She looked nothing like the woman Isabel used to mock for being ordinary. In that moment, she radiated credibility. The prosecutor began gently, asking her to describe her relationship with Isabel. Leah spoke plainly, her voice steady as she recounted years of strained family ties and the moment she caught Isabel and Thomas together. Then she told the jury about Aunt Marjorie. Her tone never wavered as she explained Isabel's role in managing Marjorie's medications, the suddenness of her death, and Isabel's uncharacteristic reaction afterward. She introduced the timeline she had compiled: days when Isabel researched digitalis poisoning, the week she ordered a refill she had no right to request. When the prosecutor placed the printed screenshots of Isabel's text messages on the overhead projector, the courtroom was silent. Jurors leaned forward to read them. Isabel boasting about finally getting my hands on that house, mocking me as one foot in the grave, and referring to Marjorie's death as a blessing. A low murmur rippled through the gallery. The defense objected, but the judge overruled. Leah met Isabel's gaze once as she stepped down. There was no triumph in her expression, only the unflinching resolve of someone who had told the truth no matter the cost. When she sat beside me, her hands trembled slightly. "It's done," she whispered. I squeezed her fingers. "Yes, it's done." Across the room, Isabel shifted in her chair, the fight draining from her posture. She was no longer the architect of her own schemes, just a woman watching her walls crumble in public. The jury had seen the real Isabel now, and there was no going back. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. I sat in the courtroom beside Daniel and Leah, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, the steady tick of the clock echoing in my chest. When the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a decision, Isabel's head snapped up. She tried to compose herself, shoulders back, chin high, but her foot tapped restlessly beneath the table. Thomas wasn't there. He hadn't been since the first week. The four-persons stood, a slip of paper in hand. On the charge of insurance fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Isabel's fingers twitched. On the charge of identity theft, guilty. A murmur ran through the gallery. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty. And then the last one. On the charge of first-degree murder, guilty. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and final. Isabel's face crumpled, not in remorse but in fury. She turned toward me, her lips moving silently as though still trying to curse me even now. The judge thanked the jury, then set sentencing for the following month. Isabel was led away in handcuffs, her posture stiff, the clink of the chains echoing as the door closed behind her. Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner. Daniel pulled me into a hug that lingered, as if he were anchoring himself to this moment. Leah's hand found mine. "It's over," Daniel said. "No," I replied softly. "It's just the beginning of the life we choose now." That evening, back in the house Isabel had once planned to steal, I stood in the garden. The winter air bit at my skin, but I stayed until the first stars appeared. This place, this family, this peace, it was still mine. And I intended to protect it for the rest of my days. Some storms destroy everything in their path. Others clear the sky.